Hallo zusammen. I'm Dave from Definitely German, and today it is my honor to finally make a video about a German whose art I greatly admire, have been admiring for years. Hans Zimmer, ladies and gentlemen. Or, as you may call him, Hans Zimmer. Or if you were to translate his name, it would be something like Hans Room, because it's das Zimmer, singular, die Zimmer, plural, the room. His musical scores for Hollywood productions, blockbusters and the like, they definitely leave room for a big atmosphere, great melodies and whatnot. But what makes Hans Zimmer great? What is his story, basically his biography even? Let's find out. I really became aware of Hans Zimmer and his work in 2008 with The Dark Knight by Christopher Nolan. I went to see that movie in the cinema back in the day, and I vividly remember coming out of it afterwards and being totally flashed by everything, including the music, which he co-composed with James Newton Howard. This was the first time that I really took notice of the importance of music in film. The idea of combining different art forms and really merging them together so that they create something bigger, something more elaborate, something more creative. I guess many of you may know that he's German, and since this channel is about everything German, Germans and Germany related, it's a great opportunity to finally talk about him. Hans Zimmer was born in 1957 in Frankfurt am Main, Frankfurt. He mainly grew up with his mother in a huge 36-room villa. His father was a successful engineer who made a fortune with the invention of new plastic technologies, which explains their lifestyle. However, when Hans was just 6 years old, his father suddenly passed away in 1963. But there was one thing that lived on in Hans: the inventive fascination for technical gadgets and technology as a whole. So already as a child, Hans experimented with cassette recorders his dad brought home. He not only recorded sounds, but he also tried to manipulate them, which in hindsight would be his first steps toward becoming a musical inventor as well. That explains his intrinsic motivation for technology. But how did he actually fall in love with music in the first place? Hans never really went to a traditional music school. Even though he got in touch with music very early on in life, because his mother took him to his first opera performance at the age of 2.5, and a few more times during his childhood, he was actually thrown out of 7 or 8 schools. He mentions 8 in his conversation with YouTuber Rick Beato, and the documentary Hans Zimmer, Der Sound für Hollywood, The Sound for Hollywood, mentions 7, just as a side note. Either way, he never really resonated with ordinary school life. So desperately, his mother tried to find a place where he could thrive, and she did that in many European countries. And eventually, she sent him to Hurtwood House in England, a reform school that allowed him to focus on music. It's funny because in the aforementioned documentary, the headmaster of Hurtwood House said that he asked young Hans, "How can we make school better for you?" To which Hans then replied, "Yeah, by just letting me make music." So, formally untrained in the classical sense, but all the more passionate, he went on to improvise music with a guitarist, a drummer, and a bassist in a basement studio at night, around the late 60s to the early 70s onwards. And why do I mention that so explicitly? Well, because both interests of his basically merged and met: music and technological breakthroughs and developments. It was the birth of so-called synthesizers, and also the idea of sampling real sounds. I guess it's fair to say that he was one of the early pioneers actively trying out this new technology, synths like the EMS VCS3 and the Prophet 5, but also by sort of being a synthesizer programmer who enjoyed experimenting with recording and altering sounds, like he did in his childhood. It's interesting when you think about it, because Maybe that combination of relentless curiosity, precision, and discipline, it's also a little German. There's a German sense of efficiency in that. And that also helped shape his style to this very day. So that was his personal path into the music scene as a whole, and especially, of course, in London. But how and when did he actually become famous worldwide? How did that come about? Living in London at the time, as you can imagine, Hans got to meet many people, musicians he would join to record a few songs with, including one that became very famous. Video killed the radio star. Of course, we're talking about the band The Bagels. And this song got a very special treatment back in the day. A music video was shot for it. And now you may think, well, but that's not a special treatment, but back in the day it was. It was something new. And it was this music video to Video Kill the Radio Star by The Bagels that was the first music video to have ever been played on a certain channel called MTV when it was launched in 1981. And not only that, but the fancy keyboard-surrounded man in the music video indeed is Hans Zimmer. And becoming even more determined, Hans decided to go all in. He started working as a synth programmer and eventually wrote his first advertising jingles for a company called Edel. And even though you may not have heard of this name before, let me tell you, it's not a small unknown name in the music business. Quite the opposite, actually. It's a well-connected music production company with strong ties to the film and media music world to this day. Being part of London's music scene and now making a name for himself at that company as well, he eventually crossed paths with film composer Stanley Myers, an established figure at the time who had already scored dozens of films, including The Deer Hunter. They began experimenting with combining traditional orchestral music with electronic elements, something that would later become one of his trademarks. In other words, as you can see, he didn't just jump straight into Hollywood fame, but actually learned the craft step by step, working alongside Myers and understanding how film music really works behind the scenes. Eventually, the creative bond between Myers and Zimmer also resulted in a co-founded studio called Lillie and their first co-produced film score for Moonlighting in the same year, 1982. In the following years, many more scores would follow, which also led to him getting more established in the scene, not just in London, but also in the big world of Hollywood. The actual, so to speak, breakthrough year for Hans was 1988. Namely, it was the huge success of the movie Rain Man that really brought him Hollywood recognition. And not only that, but also his very first Oscar nomination. Even though he didn't win that one back in the day, he still gained notoriety and eventually got the chance to compose music for the Disney film The Lion King, König der Löwen, in German, by the way. And it was this score that would literally score him his first Oscar in 1995. Now, even more established and highly requested, Gladiator, Pirates of the Caribbean, and more projects would follow. Taking a huge leap forward to March 2026, the time of recording this video, Hans has composed over 150 film scores. And it's a number that still continues to grow. In order to really focus on his work, he founded a composing company called Remote Control Productions. And over time, this building sort of became a composer's compound, if you will. Not just for him, but also for many other composers, many of which started as assistants to him. Among those former assistants are also fellow German composers, like Klaus Badelt, who tried out with a rather avant-garde soundtrack to Pirates of the Caribbean, when Hans apparently helped him out composing the main themes of the score. And then there's also Ramin Djawadi from Duisburg in Germany. And even though you may not know the name, you definitely know his work. For instance, the iconic theme of Game of Thrones. You know, that kind of stuff. And even though it's located in Santa Monica, California, meaning in a beautiful environment close to the beach, His own studio room actually doesn't have windows, because it helps him to work up until deep into the night even, without actually noticing that it's quite late. Even though in life there rarely is a single success formula for something, there are maybe a few facets, a few different formulas that Hans has developed throughout the years. But how does he actually approach composing in the first place? Let's find out. Now, for film composers, you would expect they watch the movie and then they compose. But in the case of Hans, he already starts composing when he knows about the basic idea, the mood, and the intentions of the director in question. Speaking to Rick Beato, he said, quote, "I want to know what's in the director's head," end quote. So instead of reading the entire script on his own right away, he first starts by having the director tell him the story themselves, because that way the director leaves out the rather irrelevant pieces and really gets to the point, the meat of the story. And it's only then that Hans gets a feel for the tone, which is meant in both a sonic and also an emotional way. And then I guess some of you may also picture him, just doodling around the keyboard. But quite the opposite, because he actually never touches the keyboard until he hears something in his head first. Another part of his success formula is finding simple yet very effective hooks, but also simple in the sense of a hook that you could play with two or, let alone one finger. The incredibly beautiful Time from the Inception soundtrack being a good example of that. And this is also where a link to other famous German composers comes into play. In his conversation with Rick Beato, Hans Zimmer refers to Ludwig van Beethoven with his Fifth Symphony. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. One simple idea, a basic hook that does the work. And once this basic idea of the story is there, he starts to write what he calls sort of a suite, which is essentially a musical diary for him, in which he explores themes and sounds. It also includes sampling, inventing sounds, building sound libraries. So all of that and more is part of the process right from the start. I guess a good example of his very efficient work ethic is Inception. Christopher Nolan was actually still shooting the movie when Hans Zimmer had already begun composing. He even sent pieces over without titles, basically as a little test to find out if he would get Zimmer's intention. There was one piece where only one single note hinted at a certain moment, the scene of Marion Cotillard's shoe drop. And without having been told, Nolan and his editor really placed Hans' piece exactly where he had intended. All of this and more highlights his general approach in composing film scores. It's about storytelling through music. Respectively, as he told Rick Beato, quote, "The job is not to listen to the director telling you what the music is he wants. If he knows what music he wants, he can do it himself." End quote. However, his musical endeavors don't stop there. In recent years, he also has found a certain love for performing live. Both in the studio and touring the world, he just loves to surround himself with incredibly talented musicians like world-renowned guitar virtuoso Guthrie Govan, and as a side note, he's been performing live with an orchestra from the Ukrainian city of Odessa. But when the war escalated in 2022, he didn't know if they would be able to join him on tour. And that's when the German government actually offered them housing in German holiday houses so that they would be safe and Hans Zimmer could rely on the musicians being available for the tour. And there are even some musical ties that go back a long time. For instance, with Lisa Gerard of Dead Can Dance. Because she's not only touring with him today, but she already recorded vocals for projects like the Gladiator soundtrack in the early 2000s with him. Another link between both worlds, the studio and the stage, is the aforementioned guitarist Guthrie Govan. When Hans Zimmer scored music for the two latest Dune movies, he deliberately let Govan trick the audience's ears. Because in the bagpipe scene in Dune, well, it's actually not bagpipes playing, but Guthrie Govan's guitar that sort of emulates the sound of bagpipes. Now, hearing all of that, I guess you may think, he seems to be a true workaholic. And it's true, but he's a passionate one, which in turn makes the work not really feel like work. And I know what I'm talking about because I can sort of relate to that feeling. Just a few days ago, at the time of recording this, I eventually got to see Hans Zimmer and his amazing group of musicians live. I went to see his show in Dortmund, Germany, and it was an incredibly touching, moving experience. I saw the dedication, I saw the talent, but I also saw the German side of him because he spoke a lot of German. He was very, very informative and very, pragmatic in the sense of he spoke to us in the audience as if we were hanging out together in like a living room, for instance, and he would casually speak to us and explain a few things, like how he approached scoring the Interstellar soundtrack and the like. And it was so fascinating, and he was so warm, not just to us, but also to his musicians. He repeatedly mentioned them and put them in the spotlight, and it was so awesome to see.
Normalerweise sind wir jetzt fertig und wir gehen jetzt von der Bühne runter und wir trinken da ein bisschen was und verhalten uns ein bisschen, applaudiert und so weiter und so fort. Und dann kommen wir wieder rauf und dann fragen wir ganz höflich, ob wir noch irgendwas hören möchten. Das dauert alles so lang und so dumm.
So if you ever get the chance of seeing him live, do it. You won't regret it. So coming back to the initial question of the video, what makes Hans Zimmer great? Being relentless, being passionate, being creative, being collaborative, but also being selfish in a positive way in the sense of, knowing what your ambition is and how you want to pursue it. And I guess in his case also, the way he works, allowing himself to be in the leading role when it comes to telling a story within the music. And with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this little biography, tribute type of video, I guess you can call it. Feel free to tell me in the comments down below, what do you think about Hans Zimmer? What are your favorite scores or your favorite pieces, of course? How did you get to know about his music and him as a person? And with that being said, definitely see you next time. Tschüss und bis zum nächsten Mal.